And I think should be a really key aspect of any healthy relationship is talking about money. Having that conversation around, what do we want our financial life to look like? What do we want our goals to ultimately be?
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Bills, here we are back again, back on the podcast.
Andrew, favourite time of the week. We say that all the time.
I know. It's really nice of you to say that your favourite time of the week is getting to chat to me for half an hour.
Hanging out with you, that's exactly the reason why. Andrew, I really like this topic and I'm pretty excited by it. And actually, you know what? Thinking back through the last couple of weeks of people that I've spoken to, I've probably had 3 people that have asked me this particular question.
It's exactly why it's on the podcast.
This is it, Andrew. This is it. So, what are we talking to people about today?
So today we're talking about to join or not to join finances. That is the question.
Ooh, I like it.
So what do you do?
Well, just before what do we do? I mean,
No. Just tell me, Bill. To join or not to join.
You get advice from 360 Financial, right? That's the thing. But I think the reason why we've been experiencing this a little bit more than we've seen in the past is because I think people are probably more aware of, just finances in general. And if you're quite independent and you get together with somebody and then all of a sudden your lives merge and slowly things start to come together, naturally, I guess it's probably an inflection point that you come to in your relationship and go, okay, what do we do? We've started to merge our goals. We've started to merge our life. What do we do about our finances? So I'm really excited by this because people are paying more and more and more attention to it. So I guess there's 3 main ways that we tend to look at this or view this in terms of what do we do? Should we merge? Should we not? Andrew, what are those 3?
Look, 3 really simple areas and you've kind of got 3 different options, right? You can either join your finances, you can either keep your finances separate, or you can do a hybrid. And we're starting to see more and more of that.
So is that a yes, no, or maybe?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, no, or yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Look, and hybrid is certainly an option. What we sometimes see is couples that say, hey, we're going to join our investment goals.
Yep.
Right? Our investment goals are going to be together because at the end of the day, if someone is, you're not going to have, or maybe you do, but just because someone's taken the right investment decisions, one person's retired and living it up and sunbathing on the beach and the other person's working till they're 75, you don't tend to see too much of that.
Yep.
And so what some people say is, we'll do a combination of both. And that's certainly an option.
Yep. From my end, I think what we might do, I might take the opposite approach and go, okay, what are the pros and cons associated with joint accounts?
Yeah.
And obviously if you think about sort of how a relationship evolves, I guess over time, as things start to get more serious and stuff, that can be the case. But I think transparency is definitely one.
Yeah.
So if you've got joint goals, joint finances, there's a huge amount of transparency there because that just makes sense and that's fair and equitable. It's a lot simpler. So in terms of your banking setup and how things operate, there's not sort of 2 different things and 2 different strategies and stuff. It all comes together. The thing that I really like as well too is it helps you merge your responsibilities so they become shared.
Yeah.
Because you're not always coming into a relationship, and we'll talk about unequal incomes and stuff like that, but I have never seen it where people come to the relationship with exactly the same financial situation, whether that's assets, whether that's liabilities, whether that's incomes. I think this is a good opportunity to press the reset button and go, okay, these are now our responsibility, our responsibilities, so they're shared as opposed to what used to be yours and used to be mine. So I tend to think that helps sort of solidify the relationship from that perspective as well too. And from a con perspective, I think you need to be really mindful of the money habits and the spending habits of the individual people, how that operated and what that expectation was as individuals. But now what does that then look like together when your money is combined? And that really leads me down the path of overspending. So if you've got somebody who's used to sort of just looking after their own patch of grass and saying, okay, I've got enough discretionary income to go and do what I want. Now that I've combined my finances, maybe that's the wrong approach because I need to take the other person into consideration. So I think being really honest with what it looks like and having we'll probably summarize on this, but having a genuine conversation around what does it look like? What's our expectations? Where's the line? What do we consider acceptable behavior? What do we consider non-acceptable behavior? But being really honest about what does that look like and ultimately making some compromises for the benefit of both parties combined.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's should be a really key aspect of any healthy relationship is talking about money. Having that conversation around, what do we want our financial life to look like? What do we want our goals to ultimately be? And irrespective of whether and we'll probably finish on this point. So, here's the punchline, but irrespective of whether you decide to, join your finances, keep it separately, do a hybrid, whatever you decide to ultimately do, I think that, the key in all of this and the key takeaway is having that open communication around, hey, these are, the things that are important to me. And then finding that middle ground to say, okay, well, now it's not just the things that are important to me, it's the things that are important to us. When you start to talk about, keeping separate finances and you look at the pros and cons associated with that, obvious pro is your independence.
Yep.
You get to, continue to maintain your independence. It can mean that there's less friction with different money styles. So, for instance, if two parties in a relationship, one person likes to, go out, spend, and the other person wants to, make sure that they're making smart money decisions and all that they're doing is, minimizing their expenditure as much as they can in order to, maximize their savings. Having separate accounts can mean that there's less friction in that I don't care what you do with your money. I don't care where you decide to spend your money, so long as, the bills are paid for, so long as the investments that we've both agreed to contribute to are, continuing to be met, everything else is ultimately up to you. That being said, it can add a significant amount of complexity. There isn't that shared visibility or not,
not
automatically.
as much.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes you can see that creep into a relationship where it's, you don't know if someone's gotten a pay rise. You don't know if someone is, putting money aside or not putting money aside outside of the joint accounts that are ultimately together. And that can create some friction, that can create some issues. And it can also mean that it's limiting you from a wealth creation perspective. And what I mean by that is if you, let's say, are looking at, a hybrid of separate money, joint investments, most people are considering joint investments as an equal distribution, 50-50, when we're putting money towards joint investments. What happens if someone's on maternity leave?
Yeah.
Okay. So do they need to contribute to joint investments? What happens with their general living expenses? They're taking time off to, take care of children. They're taking time off, not necessarily for a personal reason, but for the benefit of the family unit. What happens if someone, and there's a, significant disparity between one person's income and the other person's income? You're now limited as to your wealth creation by the person's ability to save that's the lowest. If one person's able to save 50 grand a year, the other person's only able to save 20, well, then your joint investments at a 50-50 distribution is only going to be 20. And what's the likelihood that the person that's saving 50 grand a year is going to take that 30 grand excess and use that for their own personal investment, or it's just going to be spent and lost in other means? So I think that keeping your finances separate can mean that, one, there may be an expiration date and maybe there isn't, right? Everyone is different. But the big thing from my end is not necessarily that it can't be done, because it can certainly all be managed, but have that conversation, be open about it, understand what's going to happen with those trigger points of, someone potentially taking time off work or unequal distribution of income, all of that stuff. Make sure that you're having those conversations before a conflict ultimately arises.
Yeah, and they're the things that we see that ultimately lead to conflict, Andrew. So I think you're right. The unequal income is, and how that is then treated and managed. I've always struggled with this personally. I kind of figured that if I'm sharing bodily fluids with somebody, then that's probably the most eloquent way that I can put it. But realistically, if we're in an intimate relationship, then this should just form part of the conversation as well too. Things like debt. So if you come to a relationship and people have different levels of debt, how is that managed? What impact does that have on the relationship and the unit? Different values towards money, like you said, living for today versus living for tomorrow. Account structures, visibility, transparency. Does it lead to a greater level of tension because you think that, okay, Andrew earns more than I do, so he's living a better lifestyle because he earns more, so it's unequal. So we have seen it work. But I think honesty and transparency is absolutely critical, plus expectation management about those key things in the future. What happens if you get a pay rise and I don't? Or what happens if you pay out your debt faster than I do? Is it your debt? Is it our debt? What does that then look like? Probably the next one for me, Andrew, to think about is entering into a new relationship, but thinking about it maybe when you're a little bit older and you've got some assets under your belt. Maybe not even just assets. You might have children from a previous relationship. Adds another layer of complexity to it as well too.
Absolutely.
And your thinking and your mindset and your tolerance for joining finances when you're younger may be different to when you're older.
Yeah.
Andrew, what do we see with that?
Yeah. I mean, look, when you're talking about two parties that are, either joining finances or keeping finances separate, after there's been kids involved or after there's a marriage involved, the complexity levels are just elevated. And I think that really you need to have those conversations early, because one person may be paying child support. One person may be coming into the relationship with a significant amount of assets while the other person is coming into the relationship with maybe nothing. One person may have a higher debt level, higher income. And so sometimes these conversations can lead down the road of, hey, maybe a binding financial agreement is the right thing.
Yep.
Generally, you're doing this when someone's also a little bit older. Now, you talk about intergenerational wealth transfer, and you talk about, parents being of the age of potentially passing away and starting to receive inheritance. How's that going to be treated? One, from a family law side of things, because you can set up whatever you like from a finance and day-to-day management. Family law will ultimately trump everything. And so making sure that if you are a party that's entering into a relationship with a significant amount of assets and the other person maybe isn't, and you're considering, okay, it's not just a matter of it, and a lot of these conversations and why we're wanting to bring these conversations to the forefront is, look, sometimes there are just shit people out there, right? So I'm going to get that out to begin with. But a lot of the times the conversation isn't, hey, I've got all these assets. I want to protect my assets because I don't trust you, which is kind of how people, consider binding financial agreement. A lot of the times the consideration is, hey, my parents, passed away and they've left this bundle of money and I want to be able to pass it on to my children, but we're still building wealth together and we're still paying off a mortgage together. So I'm trying to balance, one, the interests of my beneficiaries, but two, your interests and, making sure that we're doing things together. And so it's just a matter of getting an understanding of what you would like things to look like at the end, and then making sure that those wishes are ultimately going to come to fruition, and review it along the way.
Yeah, and that's more and more common, just period. People are getting into relationships older. Marriages don't last as long. Relationships don't last as long. there is a way forward, and there's a way to navigate through that and tick those boxes along the way. There are financial instruments out there, the binding financial arrangement. And once again, sort of coming back to what we see is, if you're open, transparent, and honest about it, and you're aligned in your thinking, there is a way to set it up legally to make these things robust, so then they don't get unwound at a particular point in time, or that somebody's wishes aren't executed as per they were originally thinking. So there are ways through this, but it's something that we're seeing more and more common as we tend to get older and new relationships form and merge and stuff like that. Something from my end that I keep thinking about when we talk about to merge or not to merge or do a hybrid model, I guess it's fair to say that for most people, thinking around what the shared expenses are, I mean, conceptually, that's a pretty simple one. We're going to experience or incur these expenses. We both need to contribute to that. And whether that's proportionally to our income, so you do it as a percentage based on what you earn, or if it's a fixed amount, there's issues with either way as well too. That one's probably the easier of the two, although we can go into that. But then thinking about, okay, what does it look like to maybe have some of our guilt-free spending, or coming back to that independence piece, how do we then have sort of our own bank account set up for the specific purpose of just fun money, essentially, and saying, okay, this is our commitment to us and the family unit and the position going forward, but we still want to have some independence with our own spending, and basically we can go do what we want at what point in time. I've seen that work really, really well. Where it tends to get unstuck a little bit is the thinking around, and I want to deeper dive on this, Andrew, is thinking around, okay, if you earn twice as much as I do you then get twice as much to spend in your fun money bucket? And do you then do we contribute the same amount to the shared expenses bucket, or do we contribute to each of those accounts on a proportional basis? So as an example, you earn 2/3 of what I do, so you put in 66% into the household shared expenses, I put in 33%, and then whatever we take in our individual buckets is the same amount, so it's fair and equitable? Or do we basically pick an amount and away we go?
Look, I think that when the disparity in income is not as large, you can do that 50-50 model and say, hey, our joint expenses are going to be joint, and then, we have our own money that's ultimately going to sit on the side. Once your discretion, or once your dispersion between where both of your incomes are is larger, then all of a sudden, I can't say that it's impossible, but it's a lot more difficult to contribute equally and equitably at 50%. Someone's earning 200 grand a year and the other person's earning 60 grand a year. Well, very likely the type of house that you're living in, the type of lifestyle that you're living is commensurate with the type of income that you earn. And the person that's, earning $60,000 a year is just not going to be able to keep up. And so I think that, again, coming back to, what we've been talking about the entire podcast is open communication, understanding, what it is that you ultimately both want, but also recognizing, hey, what's my partner's capacity? I mean, if they're just surviving on 2-minute noodles and I'm, going to lunch at Nobu every day, well, is that really the type of relationship that you ultimately should be engaging in? But, what's someone else's capacity to be able to do something? And again, when you're talking about blended relationships, exactly the same story where it's, okay, you might have two parties that have the same level of income, but one person is paying child support and the other person isn't. Well, how do you balance that? It's different for everyone. Have the conversation, have the communication, understand where everyone is coming from, and be empathetic towards it.
Yeah, and you're right, when incomes are similar, it's definitely easier to do, subject to thinking about down the track. So if there's a point in time where somebody takes time off work, and the most obvious one that I tend to go to is paternity leave or having a child, what happens at that point in time when somebody takes time out in order to raise a child? what do you then do? Because that unwinds that position. I actually had a conversation with a client a couple of weeks ago about this specific matter. And essentially what I was brought in to do was to realign the expectations very, very rapidly with the partner around, hey, your partner essentially is going to give birth and have a year off. You can't keep this split finances anymore. It's not even shared. 100% of this is now your responsibility until they go back to work.
Yeah.
And that worked really, really well, thankfully. And he was quite open and honest with that conversation as well too. But we needed to have that conversation to make sure that they were aligned in their expectations. So that may work while incomes are the same or similar. But when you start taking into consideration things do change over time, it tends to unwind that position. But that's probably a good lead into what are some of the best practice things that we see. How do we think about setting this up? What do we think about when we talk best practice? I mean, for me, like I said, openness and transparency and being honest, I think they're really the key things. But Andrew, what else have we got that people can think about?
Yeah, and look, conceptually, 100% agree with you. I think that the question is, how do you actually do it? How do you have those conversations, and how do you make sure that those conversations happen? And I think the best way to do it is, set financial check-ins.
Yep.
If you're engaging with your accountant, you're checking in, when you're doing your tax return, when you're doing your tax planning. If you're engaging with your financial advisor, you're checking in as to how things are progressing, what your goals are, and what you ultimately want to do. At the end of the day, your partner is going to be someone that you're going to be engaging with on a financial basis more often than any of those people, or should be engaging with more often than any of those people.
You'd hope so.
So set regular check-ins.
Yep.
Whether it's once every 6 months, once a quarter, once a month, depending on how involved someone wants to be with finances or a couple want to be with finances, set a regular check-in of, hey, this is where we are. This is where we said that our savings should be by this time, and this is what we got to. And evolve your financial structure as things change.
Yep.
Someone goes on paternity leave. Okay, well, great. Let's, change the way that we're managing things either from this point forward or, for a period of time. Someone is, has an amazing opportunity to work overseas for 12 months and they're going to triple their income and the other person's not going to work. Well, great. How do we then manage it over that period of time? Check in on a regular basis, set regular financial check-ins with your partner to make joint decisions, even if someone is the more, I don't want to say dominant because it's got a negative connotation attached to it, but someone takes the lead on finances more.
Yep.
I'm in financial advice, so naturally Stacey, while she is still involved in finances and understands things on a general level, she's not as involved as what I am. And so her default position a lot of the times is, you make the call, you tell us what we need to do. And I think that it's important that even if you are the person that may be, the main decision maker from a financial perspective, it's okay, that's fine that you trust me and that I make, a lot of the decisions around or larger decisions around finances, but let's check in on a regular basis. Let me tell you my thought process and my opinion. You tell me your thought process and your opinion, and then you come together and make a decision together. But set it as a regular reminder, even if it's just a 15-minute conversation, because I think that transparency, honesty, and conversation in all of this is the most important aspect.
There's nothing sexier, Andrew, than a financial date night. How about that? Huh? What do you reckon?
Sorry, Bill's not going to agree with you on that one.
At Nobu for lunch. Well, it's not a date night, date day.
Date day.
When Andrew's paying.
No, yeah, exactly right.
I think in closing, the thing that I want to get across is that
we're setting a 14th of January is Valentine's Day. The 14th of March, Feb. The 14th of
old
March.
Dodge, young Dodge.
Yeah, exactly right. That's going to be your Valentine's date night. Is that what it is?
Apparently so. But the point I want to get across, I think, here is that it doesn't have to be fixed. It does change as time progresses, it does change, and there is a way through it. We've seen 1,000 different combinations, and it does work.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of getting the right support, having that conversation, being open, honest, transparent. If financial instruments are involved, they're out there as well too. Ultimately, like what we kind of say week in, week out, kind of like a broken record, but it's a great opportunity to be able to get some advice. If you do get this right, it can make life a hell of a lot easier, as opposed to if you do get it wrong. We see it time and time again that it's a point of conflict, and it's a stress that people don't need and can avoid.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, I reckon that answers the question about to join or not to join finances. Thank you.
Thanks again. Another great podcast. Thanks to our viewers and our listeners for tuning in and making it all the way through to the end. So if you did, like, subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
The information in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. It is not financial, legal, or tax advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should consider whether the information is appropriate to your circumstances and seek professional advice before acting on any of the information provided. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of Acumen Financial Planning Proprietary Limited.